All righty. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. This is Blake Winkler, Solution Engineer, coming to you live for this week's edition of Liticast. And I'm so excited to be back. I know it's certainly been a while since I've been hosted one of our episodes, but I know you're not here for me. You are here for Rebecca. Rebecca is here today. I'm going to let her introduce herself very quickly, what she does, what her business is, and what she's here to talk about. So, Rebecca, first and foremost, thanks so much for joining me today on today's episode of Liticast. Could you go ahead and say hello to our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. My name's Rebecca Barabee, and I am the founder and CEO of Avenue 33, which is a litigation finance consultancy.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Rebecca. That's perfect. And I'm going to just go ahead and get into the laundry list of, your background, just so our audience, has the credentials of why you're here and why we're talking about what we have on the docket today. You've been in business, you've worked in the business of litigation finance since 2016. And before you founded your company, you were head of corporate affairs at a leading litigation arbitration fund manager with over $2 billion of AUM, overseeing dozens of actual and potential cross-border complex litigation arbitration finance transactions. You've also served on numerous boards, which I certainly hope that you can get into in today's discussions as well. I'll let you dig at that, as well as to your litigation finance experience. You've worked in communications and politics and practiced law. After graduating from Duke, you were in political affairs and public relations at Edelman in the U.S. national political campaign. You've just been all over the place. And so you can certainly talk to that. I know you practice some private equity at M&A lawyer at Kirkland & Ellis, and in a legal group of a global private equity fund. So you certainly have the credentials, and we're so excited to host you today. And before I get into the conversation, I always want to do a little bit of a plug for Liticast. So for anybody joining us, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, that little subscribe button, that little notification down, go ahead and tap that little bell icon, get those subscriptions, so whenever Liticast goes live, you're always going to get reminded to find us on your favorite channel. You can always find us on litify.com/Liticast. But we want to make sure that we are in all of the locations that you go ahead and find your content. So really excited to be, speaking with Rebecca today. And always, audience, we love getting questions from you. So please chime in, the little comment box wherever you are, viewing the stream. Ask questions directly to Rebecca, things that you want to get input on, feedback on, pick Rebecca's brain. That's why we have her here today. And I'm certain she is going to welcome all of those great questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and kick things off. Certainly have a couple things, Rebecca, that I wanted to get through. But again, really glad to have you today. Want to start with, Avenue 33, right? You guys advise stakeholders through the finance process. Where did that idea for your company come from?
It's a great question. So when I was at my last fund, I was doing litigation finance, obviously from the funder perspective. But because of the role that I played there, I really saw firsthand how the different stakeholders interacted. So on any specific litigation finance deal, there are pretty much always at least three stakeholders, right? It's the litigant themselves, so the plaintiff, let's call it, the law firm that's actually going to be litigating the case at hand, and of course the funder who is providing the cash. And those three parties come from very wildly different backgrounds in terms of what they bring to the table and what they know, right? The litigators, of course, are experts in the law and litigation, and they know how to argue a case and win a case, right? And potentially settle a case also, which is also sometimes a win. The companies come with, of course, all the factual knowledge of the case firsthand, because they're the ones who've experienced whatever has, or has caused this case to arise. And they often have expertise in whatever their business is about, whether it's like a mining company or a widget seller. It doesn't really matter. That's what their expertise is in. And then, of course, you have the funder. And the funder, frankly, is typically the only party at the table who has done tons and tons of these types of financings, right? I mean, often the other players are relatively new or have done a limited number and have only seen this from their own perspective. So, you have people talking business terms and finance terms and factual terms, and it's very hard for those groups to come together. I've seen it firsthand, simply because people start talking past each other, right? And it should be that way. Everybody should have their own expertise. But who sits in the middle that can kind of translate the different languages among the different stakeholders? And I found that ultimately, a lot of the time, unfortunately, those differences in communication style and knowledge backgrounds caused significant delay, which frankly can cause, a lot of diminution of value. And so that's why I came up with the idea of becoming a consultant, because I thought that being sort of at the center of a financing from the start, when you're negotiating the deal through the close, all the way through the end of the case, right, which is when kind of the parties hopefully celebrate and then separate, takes a lot of assistance and guidance, and somebody who can kind of see the transaction as from an overall perspective, including the business, including the financing, including the legal pieces. So that's why I thought that a person who can come in and kind of understand and have the background in all of those elements could really add value to a particular transaction.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think a lot of us can apply that, again, not to undermine anything, but, first you think of it as a mediator, but it's more than just a mediator. It's somebody that, can translate, like you said, business terms, legal terms, but also connect the dots between those two parties. Like you said, I loved how you put it, talking past each other, right? And it just bringing and bridging that gap between the two, not only moderating, but also, providing recommendation, providing best practices, providing experience ultimately. So I can come in as that, that trusted advisor. I can come in as that, expert in this arena and bridge the gap, not only between the twos, but also hopefully, come up with, favorable outcomes for all parties involved.
That's exactly right.
Okay. So then, why would you think, I think this is kind of a natural segue, right? So, you got the idea for, it was born out of that simple yet elegant idea where somebody needed to come in and be that expert. So then why do you think that, or maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, but, is this something that might be, overlooked by law firms right now, the importance of having, that advisor in the financing process?
It's a great question. And, I think sometimes the answer is yes. And I think it's not just about law firms overlooking the need for an advisor in litigation finance, but it's also just the reality of the market, because litigation finance is still relatively new. So it's not shocking that the industry's impact is still sort of getting understood by the other parties. So a lot of law firms have embraced litigation finance from the very beginning, and perhaps have some more experience just having used it over the years. And, that can be great. But a lot of law firms have not. A lot of law firms have yet to either do one deal or even multiple deals, because the truth is, this taking on litigation finance is nothing like taking on a revolving credit line from a bank. I mean, litigation finance is kind of a living, breathing deal that changes, because litigation, as we all know, especially all the lawyers watching this show, the rule of litigation is to expect the unexpected, right? You can have a perfect plan, but other elements come in, other things come up, and it requires additional thought, additional research, and frankly additional money, and that's where the financing comes in. So these documents a little bit have to provide the room for that. The documents, I should say, documenting the deal of the litigation finance need to have the room to kind of wiggle a little bit in situations where things don't turn out exactly as we expect, which is frequently. So what I would say is, litigation finance is really a wonderful tool that law firms can use to basically allow them to not worry at all about the credit risk of their clients, feel entirely comfortable that they are going to get paid either on a regular basis or in a lump sum, depending on what the deal is, so that they can really just go in and focus on the law, which is really what law firms want to do and what lawyers want to do. You know, the business of law is separate and apart from the actual lawyering. And I can't tell you how many lawyers I've dealt with and I've spoken to about bills, and they say to me, oh my gosh, this is the worst part of my job, having to deal with these bills. And guess what? I get it. It is pretty bad. But think about how awesome it could be for a law firm to really not have to worry about that, to set the budget from the beginning. Because here's a little known fact: all the parties in a litigation finance really want the lawyers to give a realistic budget from the beginning. They want to know how much this is going to cost. So, you know, lawyers get a little bit, and depending on the deal, but they get a little bit of freedom that way. They can say, this is going to cost X dollars, but I know to expect the unexpected because I've done this so many times. So I'm going to add a slightly larger amount to my budget for the unexpected. And by the way, funders know that they're going to do that and want them to do that, so that there aren't any times in a case where there's no money left. I mean, that's kind of the worst case scenario. So lawyers have a lot of control in that sense. They can set the budget, and then they can feel comfortable that they are in fact going to get paid. I mean, what could be better? And then they can just focus on just doing their job, which is exactly what, you know, they should be doing. And I think, you know, once law firms and lawyers start to get comfortable with the idea that this litigation finance can really be a tool for them and for their business, I think it's going to slowly become a no-brainer that this is an excellent idea for law firms. It is an excellent idea for clients, but it is certainly an excellent idea for law firms too, because it adds that kind of level of credit comfort.
You make a great sell, Rebecca, for a couple of reasons, right? It's incredibly compelling. You know, first, you know, let lawyers be lawyers, right? That's of course, you know, why they went to law school, what they expect when they come out of law school. That, hey, I'm going to be practicing law, right? I don't need to, worry about setting the budgets. I don't need to be, worrying about collecting, bills, right? I mean, all those things. Like, I want to spend more time practicing law because I want to provide the best client experience as possible, right? So I think that's obviously your first pitch. Another thing to certainly summarize is that, well, now we need to identify that this litigation financing is, a core part, or should be a core part of, their business, where for all the things that you would discuss, where, making sure there's not credit risk, monetizing all of that work that's being done. And ultimately, what the services that you guys provide, educating lawyers on the business of law. And you said it when we were preparing, before the show, is that, the lawyers are actually, the big winners here, right? They're the ones that, for what you said, because they're setting the budget, and they're collecting some of that upside when it becomes available. So, you really talked about it, previously, and kind of weaved it into the answer of your last question. But because they're setting that budget and because the financing is there, they become the big winners for these deals. So I just love the angle that you guys are taking in the initiative here, because this is a legitimate business, and B, something that should not be overlooked and something that really should be thought about. So really love that the angle that you guys are taking here.
Absolutely, I agree with you. I think also something else that lawyers should remember is sometimes cases come in that are really good cases, solid cases, and the litigant can't afford to bring them. And this is a way that the law firm can sort of get rid of that credit risk and still be able to bring that case on behalf of their client. So I really, truly think, there are certainly benefits to all the stakeholders, to the litigant, to the funder, but really, I think the law firms are sort of the biggest winner in this entire industry.
Right. So then, I talked about your pitch kind of, jokingly, but now I want that pitch, right? Tell me why you think lawyers, right? What's your value proposition? Why should lawyers need someone advising them through this process, right? For all the lawyers that are out there listening to the show today, tell me right now why you think they need to be advised through this process.
Right. Well, lawyers, I am a lawyer, so I fully understand that lawyers know the best about practicing law. There is no question about it. However, this, as I said, this litigation finance idea is still a relatively new concept. There's very little sort of external regulation specifically with respect to this market. There's not one, massive database that any one person can go to and say, tell me everything about litigation finance. How do the deals work? There are many, many litigation funders out there. And of course, there are common trends among them. But the truth is they do things differently. And I wouldn't say that this industry is the Wild West exactly, but it is certainly not standardized, which leaves, A, a lot of room for opportunity and creativity, which is great, but B, a lot of uncertainty, because when you as a lawyer are busy practicing law and helping your clients, win cases, you don't have the time or the energy to do the legwork to really understand what options are out there for me as a lawyer, for my firm, or for my clients, right? Because there's plenty of opportunity not only for litigants to get funded, but there's now a huge push for law firm portfolio funding. So law firms themselves can take on the financing so that they can pick and choose their cases. Of course, there are caveats to that, but I think the point that I'm trying to make is lawyers should be focused on what they are good at. And in order to get into this industry in the right way, for them, and it's very specific and individualized still at this point, it can be valuable to bring on a player like Avenue 33 to help navigate and figure out what is it that you want? How much money do you think you need? Which cases are you trying to monetize? How much, what percentage of them do you want to monetize? Do you have a particular case in mind, or do you just want to do your business generally? There are so many different options out there, and not every funder will do all of the options. So just knowing what's out there can be a struggle. So you can bring me in to help figure out what the sort of landscape looks like. And then further, once we kind of narrow down what exactly it is that you are looking for, what could be beneficial for your business, I can help guide and navigate you through the entire process from, closing a deal with a funder all the way through managing the relationship with the funder until all of the cases have been resolved. So, I think it's a good sort of thing to outsource, just like you would outsource anything, just like a business outsources, selling itself. They hire an investment banker. They don't go and do that themselves because they don't have the expertise. So that's what I think I can add value in that way.
Awesome, Rebecca. Awesome. Lawyers, you heard it here first. Drop your questions, your comments in. I mean, you have a great opportunity here right now to pick Rebecca's brain, in real time. Please feel free to use those comments. Fire some questions away. I certainly have a couple more that I wanted to get through from Rebecca and I's, previous conversations on what we wanted to talk about today. But one thing that you just had mentioned there, Rebecca, as we wait for a couple of those questions to hopefully stream in, is that, let's tie what you just said back into your experience and just talk about, again, why this business was born, right? Because you had quite the career, right? I went through that laundry list of, not only, your credentials, but where you've been, what you've done, and that unique experience of working on both sides of the table, right? So to go off of not only why you think, lawyers should, spend more time practicing law and leaving it to, experts like yourself to work on the actual finance side of the house, what should we know when it comes to the concerns or the motivations even for each of the individual parties involved here?
Right. So, people always say to me off the bat, well, everybody's interests are aligned, right? Everybody wants to win. And I say, yes, that is entirely true. Everybody does better when the case wins, and particularly wins a lot in damages, right? Because then there's a lot of money to be shared. So yes, that is true. But the reality it's much more nuanced than that, because lawyers understandably want to win cases. They want to win big, but first and foremost, they want to win. And sometimes for lawyers, depending on the case, and this makes perfect sense, They want to sort of win with a particular caveat, making some kind of precedent that can help their line of business going forward, right? That can be lawyers. Funders really just, obviously they're good people and they care about justice, but at the end of the day, what they have promised their clients and their LPs is money. So they want to win big. That's their goal. It's not just to win. They don't just want to win with a dollar. They want to win big, right? And then the business people sometimes really don't know what litigation finance is about, and that's legitimate because it's still relatively new. And their goal maybe is somewhere in the middle. Probably they want to win big, you can assume in most cases, but maybe they want to settle. Maybe they want a continuing license or a continuing right from the defendant. Maybe they want, to buy the business down the road. I mean, there are a plethora of opportunities and different ideas that people can come in with. So one thing that I want, lawyers to know is that these concepts are very nuanced. Often a funder will tell a lawyer, I don't want the best case. I don't care if this is litigated with the most, accurate case law and the most, compelling ideas. All I care about is getting my money out. And, I've seen tensions arise where lawyers say, well, this is the best way to proceed with this argument, and we need to hire these experts, and we need to go down this path. And the funders are saying, well, do you really need to do that? Because we just need to get here. It doesn't need to be the best. It just needs to get done. And we don't have another 6 months, 8 months, a year, whatever it is to make those arguments, because the clock is ticking and time is money. So more nuanced concepts come up, and not everybody sitting at the table is perfectly aligned. So it's really important from the outset to recognize that, and then to do your best when negotiating the deal to keep that in mind, so that there is the flexibility and you don't get stuck a year or two into the deal with misalignment and problems that can come up from that, and diminish value for all the players, really. So it's an essential part of the game. Another thing to remember is negotiating the deal is not the end of the deal. So when you close the deal, you are really just starting the relationship. And the truth is, these relationships, like any relationship, like any marriage or friendship or whatever, take work. I mean, they don't, most of the time the funders don't say, here's the money, call me in 3 years when you get the cash out. So, that's something else to keep in mind as well. It does take effort over time to make sure that everybody is still getting along and still in alignment, and interests haven't changed, because sometimes they do.
So you're almost that glue, if you will, or like I said, that bridge earlier, right? That helps each other. Again, we're coming back to kind of the opening of the Liticast today, that understands one another's perspective. So kind of off the cuff here, why is it so hard for the funders, especially, to understand why these cases cost so much money, right? Because I know you just talked about that, the investors wish that the lawyers knew that they want to win big, right? But how about the inverse of that? Why is it so hard for them to understand why these cases cost so much money?
Sure. No, well, I think that, it depends on the funder, but I do think that funders go into these cases sort of with their eyes wide open, recognize a lot of funders, incidentally, I should say, are former litigators. So people recognize that these are not easy, right? If this were easy, the returns would be a lot lower, frankly, right? And everybody would be doing it. It wouldn't be sort of something that's attractive to investors. So it is widespread and known that these cases are complicated and hard and take time.
Sure.
Having said that, though, there are, lawyers like to do their thing, and lawyers are expensive. It's just the reality of 2020 and 2021. They are pricey. And the thing that I think matters most to funders is that litigators stick to their budgets.
Sure.
And, theoretically, if a deal works properly, if everybody sticks to the budget, things will go smoothly. The issue is what I alluded to before, that unfortunately in litigation, it's the nature of the beast that there are unexpected needs that come up because the defendant makes an argument you were hoping they didn't make, or seems like out of left field and really is totally irrelevant, but query whether it's right for the case to address it or not. And addressing new issues costs more money.
Sure.
So there is sort of an element to that. Now, I think, just to get into the detail just a tiny bit about how these litigation financings work, there are different ways to kind of slice the cake, but a lot of the time it can be a law firm, may still get paid hourly, but may also still take a piece of the upside. So I think that's a good way for law firms to think about these cases. First of all, a lot of funders like when law firms have a little bit of skin in the game in terms of a percentage of upside, because they want, of course, the lawyers to want to win and to win big. So that can be an attractive element to funders, but it can also be an attractive element to lawyers because funding can be used to get you paid hourly, but you can also still make money above and beyond, your actual costs.
Sure.
And you can't always do that. I mean, that's not always a possibility. And so sort of that is one way that I think can allow lawyers to feel a little comfortable maybe going over their budgets and eating it a little bit with the recognition that they can actually make upside in the end. So again, there are a bunch of different ways to structure these transactions with funders, but these are things that lawyers should keep in mind. It's historically been known that a litigation finance shop will come in and ask for, here's X dollars and I want to get out 3 times my money at the end. But that's not standard anymore. That's not, there are so many different varieties to that lawyers should not be, sort of scared out of taking money because they think that's what litigation finance is. It's just not anymore. There are so many different ways to do it.
Sure. So you talk about all these best practices, right? You talk about all the things that you've seen lawyers do, very well, right? When you've, worked on litigation financing with them, you've talked about, some of the, the big wins that, everybody has had, and you've seen it all, right? Because again, you've sat on both sides. So what about the inverse of that? What things, I think this could be a great takeaway for all of us here. What are some things that you've seen, maybe some mistakes that lawyers have made specifically when it comes to these finances, right? What are the pitfalls, right? We talked about, the best practices, the motivations, the things that people are doing well. What are the things we need to look out for?
Sure. So I think, the biggest problem I have seen from lawyers, and it's such a tough job, so I fully understand why this mistake gets made a lot, is really underestimating their own budgets. And I keep coming back to this because this really does sort of form the basis of the entire structure of the deal. A lot of the time when funders come into a case, whether it's through the law firm or through the litigant, everybody looks to the law firm to say, how much is this going to cost? And maybe because, law firms are conservative by nature, because, the bunch of type A lawyers like me, I include myself in that category. But I think that we get afraid to ask for too much to scare away the funder. And the lawyers really only benefit themselves if they give a very honest perspective as to what they think something is going to cost and build in that buffer. And it is okay to tell funders, I think this case is going to cost X, but I want to build in a 10% or whatever you think is appropriate buffer, because I recognize that this likely will go over, because historically this is how litigations work. So, right, it's so much better to say that at the outset so that funders and litigants can price that in day one. It is so much harder when you're 2 years down the road into a case and you need more money and everybody looks at each other and says, well, who's going to put it in?
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
Right.
that's when the tensions arise and things blow up.
Sure.
So it's really incumbent on the lawyers to be honest about what they expect their budgets to be and to include their yearly increases in the budgets, because most firms do increase prices slightly at year end or whenever their fiscal year ends. That's pretty common. I've seen that a lot, and I'm sure a lot of the lawyers on this Liticast will agree. It's important to consider that in your budget too, because if you're doing a case that's going to take 3 years, that's 2 or 3 increases in your price, and that needs to be priced in. So there are all these little nuances that need to be considered day one to avoid pitfalls down the road.
Excellent. So you've heard all the best practices. We've heard all, the gotchas, the mistakes, the things to look out for. I mean, I think, I'm not sure if it would be safe to say this, Rebecca, you'd have to tell me, but, the thing that I'm hearing, again, not being a lawyer, is just to be honest about these budgets, right? You've said it multiple times in your last response. You said it multiple times in a couple of your other responses, but you would rather, right? Instead of hit those pitfalls, a year before the actual, litigation ends, and hey, it would have been really nice if we asked for, more money because this is what we actually thought it was going to be, but we wanted to sound better. So, not being afraid to shy away from what you think it's going to be what it's actually going to cost, because it sounds like these funders really want that realistic number. And hopefully by having, somebody like you involved, you're advising both sides where you've seen it, what it looks like, hey, what should this actual budget be based off of the parameters, the requirements that the firm, is going through. And then, on the funder side, supporting them, being able to say, hey, maybe we need to have deeper conversations here. Maybe we need to advise one way or another, because, I'm not sure if this is realistic or not, so obviously another value add, specific plug for you there, where you can come in again and be that mediator because you've sat on both sides.
That's right. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, of course. I'm learning something here too. I mean, I'm hoping for most of our audience that, this, is really resonating, that, it's opening up this whole other vertical, that, hey, I didn't realize I had access to. Hopefully that's what, the audience is getting out of it. I'm, for one, is just getting a lot of just, regular knowledge out of this and understanding, okay, these budgets and these finances. And so I really appreciate the conversation that, that we're already having here, Rebecca. And we're getting kind of close to the end of our time here. Still waiting for a couple of questions to stream through. So one final plug for the audience. You have Rebecca here. I know we're going to post her contact information at some point. There it is. Marketing right on cue. Kudos to them. But you can see here now, you can reach out to Rebecca and her team to get some specific questions. Maybe if you don't feel like putting them, in the chat, would rather have more of a personal contact, can certainly reach, Rebecca and her team at their website. But the last question that I wanted to get into was kind of something that we had talked about on the side and wanted to weave it into our conversation here, because it's more about your specific business approach and how you approach your clients. We talked about when you were advising, you focus so much on that relationship management as well as outsourcing, which was, such an interesting combination. Why is that so important in context specifically to litigation finance?
Sure. It's a good question. And I think we've sort of touched on it a little bit throughout this entire conversation, which is to say, these deals are long-term, and there is, I used to work in M&A, and that was when we would, buy and sell a company, and you'd spend 3 to 5 intense months negotiating and documenting, and then everybody would sort of shake hands and part ways. That is not the case here. In this scenario, people, spend 3 months or so negotiating a deal and then stay in it for 3, 5, sometimes 10 years, depending on what the types of cases are that are being invested in. And so I think something to remember is that these are long-term relationships. Whether they're structured as this or not, they're essentially partnerships. They're financial partnerships. And, that means that there are going to be ups and downs because these are complicated. This is not easy money. These are not, if it was, easy, everybody would do it. And And therefore, it's a lot more than just, let's paper this and move on. So there's a lot to think about, and the financial consequences can be very large. We can be talking about smaller cases, or we can be talking about cases that are going to be earning billions of dollars in awards. I mean, that's a tremendous amount of money that necessarily requires a lot of thought and overview, and relationships require tending to. So, it's a good idea, I think, to have somebody, in your corner who has done this. I've done this many, many times, and I understand how these, cases play out. And I'm eager to kind of help, because I think that litigation finance can really benefit a wide swath of people, particularly the lawyers. So, for firms and people who are getting involved in this for the first time, or think maybe they want to be involved, I'm certainly happy to help, because I do think that these can be extremely rewarding financially and otherwise. So I'm happy to help.
Amazing. I guess what I'll wrap up with is, that guidance, the perspective that you provide, right? In summary, the talking past one another, being able to sit on both sides, being able to translate, business outcomes into, financing outcomes, and what those actually mean, and be that bridge for the two sides, and really be an advocate for both, which I think is, an incredible opportunity for all parties involved. So with that, Rebecca, I wanted to, and on behalf of Litify, I wanted to thank you so much for joining us on this week's edition of Liticast. We admire and really appreciate, what you're doing here, and hope for all that are listening today, took away something, whether it was, you learned something new, you learned, a specific angle that maybe you can play out, or now you have a contact that you can, dig into with Rebecca here. But Rebecca, first and foremost, just thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation. I really appreciate it.
Of course, I did too. I love hosting these Liticasts, and we certainly, learn, so many new, nuances, especially for myself, and appreciate, the refreshing, passion that you have for this really niche avenue, ironically enough, avenue of expertise that you have. So with that, everyone, again, more shameless plugs from me on with Litify, but follow us on LinkedIn, again, Facebook, our website, subscribe on YouTube, right? That little bell icon down below, wherever you get your content from, Litify is going to be there. So make sure you subscribe to that, get those little push notifications, so you can always join us on these great conversations that we have with industry thought leaders. And also another plug for our Slack community. If you're not on that as well, make sure you get on there. You can directly communicate with, Litify employees, other people across the industry, where we're just trying to get people together, forward thinkers, bounce ideas off one another. So we have a great community for that. So definitely want you to get on there to see industry news, talk about marketing trends, job opportunities, and just a great opportunity to network with other forward-thinking firms and forward-thinking people in our awesome industry. Lastly, you'll see this on our this recording. If you wanted to get some more information on it, it'll be up on our website, litify.com/Liticast. And with that, I wanted to, again, thank you now, the audience, for joining us today, giving us some time this Thursday afternoon. You can see your contact information on how to get a hold of Rebecca and her team. And with that, your host today, hopefully I'll see you guys next time. But everybody, take care and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.